Welcome to Space to Lead, the podcast where leaders and teams come together to learn, grow, and thrive. I'm your host, David LeBlanc, and every episode will explore fresh insights and strategies that inspire leaders to create dynamic, engaging cultures. We'll dive into conversations with leaders and industry experts who are transforming teams and shaping the future of leadership. Whether you're leading from the front or working within a team, Space to Lead is here to spark ideas and help you lead with purpose and passion. So, take a deep breath, make some space, and let's lead together. Today we're diving into a topic that's all too familiar to many of us: busyness. We've all felt it, that overwhelming influx of information, the constant demands on our time, the struggle to prioritize and to stay focused. But is busyness an inevitable part of leadership, or can we find ways to create space for clarity, strategic thinking, and effective action? Joining us today is Susan Goebel, a fractional COO and leadership expert who's here to share her insights on navigating the chaos and becoming a more effective and less overwhelmed leader. Susan, it is so great to have you here today.
David, thank you so much for making the invitation. It is my pleasure to be here.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I learned something new last time we chatted, because I had never heard of the term fractional COO. And I suspect if I hadn't heard of that, others haven't. So I'd love if you could take a moment just to share with our listeners what it is that you do.
Well, thank you. And you know what? You're right. Not everybody's heard the term fractional COO, but a lot of people have heard the term chief operating officer or director of operations. And usually those are the people that are the right hand to the owner, the president, the GM, the CEO. And so that's what we do. We're the second in command. And the fractional component really comes into play because we're part-time. We're there for those organizations that aren't necessarily big enough yet to have their full-time, because that can be expensive, COO. And so we come in on a part-time basis to help manage the teams and take that vision that the CEO has and really get the rubber to hit the road and bring it to life.
Okay, so I'm getting the sense more shorter term contracts. You go in, help get set up, establish a few systems, processes, and then move on to the next gig.
Exactly.
Nice.
Exactly. We're not your forever people, I like to say on our calls and conversations. And so we look at three different types of problems. We look at process problems, as you just mentioned, profitability challenges, and the other one that's more likely to be of interest to your audience, the people challenges, because that gets into the area of strategic leadership and coaching and all of those pieces.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what I was thinking as you were chatting. From a leadership perspective, you must have some stories to tell.
There might be one or two.
So knowing that we've got, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes, I'd love to dive into that leadership element of the work that you talked about. Because I imagine over time, you likely notice patterns in sort of what shows up when you're working with new leadership teams or with organizations who are trying to establish an effective leadership practice or leadership team. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some of your experiences that you might be able to share with our audience.
Well, thank you, David. You know, the speed of communication today is very interesting. And you and I were just talking about this before we hit the record button. Sorry, guys. And I was telling a story about a little bit of me doing some family history and genealogy pieces because I love to do that stuff. And so back in the 1800s, there was some pieces with family who were trying to emigrate over. They had bought a parcel of land, but there was a snafu with the government because that never happens, right? And unfortunately, they had to wait. And there were these 5 or 6 pieces of communication back and forth. And, you know, in this day and age, in 2024, 2025, as we're sitting here and we're looking at how we communicate, it is so instantaneous. And that's the expectation. Could you imagine writing, redrafting because you made a boo-boo, right? There's no instant scratch it out. You have to have a perfect copy. And then you fold the letter. And then you mail the letter. The letter has to get there, and then somebody has to open it. And oh my gosh, you know, today it's instant and we expect it. And part of that creates very interesting pieces when you are communicating as a leader. People expect your message to be perfectly crafted, on time, immediate, and that's not always the best way to go about it. Sometimes you need to take a moment. I think about it even in terms of a communication SOP and say, back and forth on text is great until it's not great. And then you need to start elevating. Do you elevate to a voice note? Do you elevate to a recording? I don't know. Do you pick up the phone, which nobody ever seems to do these days? Do you hop on a Zoom call? What do you do in order to get your message across? Because communication and leadership are so entwined.
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny. I had this image when you were talking about the perfectly crafted message of Bridgerton. Have you heard of that series?
I've heard of it. I have not watched it.
Okay, just the care and attention that went into crafting a letter, the words that they used. We do not create space for that at all.
No.
It's go, go, go. And sometimes, unfortunately, after you hit send, it's like, oh, damn, I shouldn't have used that word or I should have said that differently.
This would have been better. Oh my goodness. Oh, I forgot to include this.
Yeah.
I'm always kind of laugh a little bit, either on Slack channels or Telegrams or whatever, the company is working with as a communication tool, how you'll have some people who write these dear so and so, and there's three well-crafted sentences, and then there's a regards and then their name, and other people are like, I'm going to give you 20 DMs. They're all going to be half sentences. Okay, I'm not sure I got all of those points. Am I adaptable enough to intuit what you're trying to tell me? And the words that people use, there's a lot of assumption around those, where people believe because I said the word red, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I said red. But sometimes there's a lot of room for interpretation.
Yeah, and gosh, just in the few minutes we've been chatting, you've spoke of so many different ways of communicating, which all I hear is noise. As a leader, all this noise coming at me. So how do you filter through all that noise?
Well, and that's really very individual, right? So I find for me, when I was leading a group of 126 people, this was a volunteer capacity. I was in the leadership role, 126 people in me, and they were communicating at approximately two messages every minute, 24/7, because they were around the world. I was able to adapt myself to how I wanted to do this. Guys, I live in this time zone. I'm setting the expectation that I'm going to be available for you here, here, and here. Outside of that, please do not anticipate that you will get a 5-minute response back from me. And likewise, I'm also going to have office hours. Some people, though, get very overwhelmed by that level of communication and those notifications that come in so quickly. And they're ding, 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 ding. I'm like, oh, that's really annoying. Learn to turn them off. It's okay. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say, hey, guys, it's this time of year when I'm going to take 2 weeks and I'm going to go spend it with my family. In communication, you don't have to be there 24/7. Just because we have instant communication doesn't mean that you have to make you available 24/7. So I know I switched a little bit there to a different leadership skill, but being able to put those boundaries in place and communicate and set expectations is really important, not just for the CEO, but also for your team. So whether you're managing up or you're managing down, those expectations are really important.
Yeah, yeah. And as you think about your role and the work that you and your team do going into organizations and helping them set all this stuff up so that they can manage the noise, become effective as teams, meet targets, meet objectives, so on and so forth. What are some of the things that are critical when you think about establishing a good leadership practice within an organization?
That is a big topic, David. So the first thing is to have its own language. And what I mean when I say that is that everybody uses the same word to describe the same thing, and everybody knows what that is, which also means when you bring somebody new onto the team, you have taken the time to educate them on that language that you use to describe something. The next part I would say is having a communication SOP in place. And a lot of organizations don't actually have this. We use, and just as an example, we use Slack to communicate the following things. We use email as our outward communication to clients. Please do not put reply all and put 20,000 people on that email. That reply all is not meant for that. Teach them what that means in your organization. Because if you are able to put those boundaries in place, now you come back to that mental health, give everyone the space and the grace that they need to be amazing at their job, and knowing that their job is not to be instantaneously accessible.
I,
I had an interesting conversation with my COO today. So while I lead my organization, I have a COO. I eat my own cooking, as they say. And I was not, so we were discussing a Google spreadsheet. And in the Google spreadsheet, it's a lot of really critical data. In each of the cells, though, I was not, when I was commenting on the cell, I was not adding her. So the at, and then you put their email address where it notifies them. And I did that on purpose because I didn't want my fractional COO to constantly get bombarded by messages. You know, because I've told you in our Slack channel that I've actually gone in and I've made edits. Now you can go and look. She's like, well, please don't do that. Do it the other way. So we had to have that conversation about communication because she didn't care that she was going to get notified on a regular basis. She would rather have that than go in and feel like she was going to miss a message because I hadn't put the at symbol in somewhere.
nice, nice. So some systems, some processes to help support all that noise that we talked about earlier that's in the system to help people to prioritize so I don't have to carry that all on myself.
Yes. And that point of discussion, I don't expect somebody who is contracted for a day a week to be spending 20 hours in the business. And but how does that reflect on me for how I act compared to how it reflects on, in this case, my COO and how her expectations are? Well, just do it because I'll just clear those messages off when I'm ready. Okay. Well, I just want to make sure there's no pressure because I know that both of us are very conscientious individuals. We're full of integrity and we want to do those pieces. We want to show up for the business. So you've got to be able to have that conversation. Come on board, set the expectations, come back and have those conversations when you aren't meeting those expectations. Because sometimes those chats where you go, you know what, there's a bit of a disagreement here, there's a bit of a rub. Don't just let it slide. Deal with it because then it won't become bigger.
Yeah, yeah. And when I think of that term, deal with it, the other thing that comes to mind for me is to name it and get it out of here and in front of you. I just came off a conversation with a couple executives this morning, a bit of an alignment meeting where it was clear that there was a lot of assumptions existing in the system. And to your point and what you've been sharing today, if you can create a bit of structure around some of these things, remove some of those assumptions, again, quiet that noise so we can focus on what's important.
Well, and that's just it, right? You really need to be able to take the time to focus. And with all those messages, all those pieces coming at you so quickly, there's a lot of leaders that get overwhelmed. And so how do you actually take the time to do that? Like in my schedule, I'm not fractional as a CEO. I'm fractional to my clients as a COO, but I'm not a fractional leader. And so I take, for example, Fridays. I do no meetings on Fridays. Fridays are my day to clear the decks, clear the space, do my thinking time because I'm not going to be interrupted. Everybody knows I don't take meetings on Fridays. Doesn't mean I'm not around. I just don't take meetings. So it's interesting to make sure that you communicate that you set the bar, set the expectations, follow it, and give yourself enough space and grace to actually enact the boundaries and the barriers you've put up. Because so many times leaders do this. Hey, I'm going to end my day at 4 o'clock because I've got to go and get the kids. Now it's 4:05, it's 4:10, so and so says they need a minute. Do they really? Should we ask that question if they actually need a minute? Or can everybody give them a break and actually let them go get their kid?
Hmm. Hmm. It's interesting as you're talking, I can actually see some interesting connections between your fractional work and a leader's work in a full-time job in a role. Because I would imagine you're popping into an organization for a set amount of time, a day a week, or whatever it is. You have to be very clear about those boundaries.
Correct.
Whereas those of us who, are a CEO or an executive in a company where it's our full-time job, boundaries often blur. So I wonder if this element of bringing that fractional component to our regular role could actually add a lot of effectiveness and efficiency.
Well, as you say that, it's kind of funny because with my clients, I've gotten very good. I wasn't very good at the beginning. I've gotten very good at going, here's the boundaries, here's the pieces. I don't do job creep anymore. We can absolutely change and shift and whatever adapt we need to do in order to adjust to current situations. For my own company where I'm not fractional, I'm full time, I'm terrible at it. I have a remote office, so it's right down the hall. So, oh, I really should just get that done before tomorrow. I mean, it's terrible, right? The
Yeah,
kids are in bed. It's fine. Nobody's going to care about me.
yeah, yeah.
The
So,
adaptability. I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
no, no, please continue.
I was just going to say the ability to deal with adaptable changes. Like, we've just come out of a world and we're post COVID, right? And so many different situations have existed now from a macroeconomic environment that we haven't seen in decades, whether it be interest rates or economic changes. There's a lot going on geopolitically that have had major impacts on different business models. I had a client. She ran an amazing business. It was a family business that's been passed on from her mom to her. And most of her material, because she was in the textile industry, came from Russia.
Mm,
And a couple of years ago, we had this little thing where you couldn't import these fabrics, these materials anymore. How do you adapt the business? These aren't things that you normally would plan for. So adaptable challenges are a unique one for leaders to think about. Do you find that a lot of the people you talk to as your clients spend time doing thinking time ish strategy sessions, reducing risk?
it's, there's so much coming at them from all different directions that it's very difficult. It's something that I encourage, challenge folks to do all the time, create what I call space to lead, those
Yep.
recurring, being intentional and even putting those recurring spaces in their calendars so they force themselves to do it. But man, there are so many demands that encroach on their time. So it's really, really challenging, which is why that conversation I alluded to earlier with a couple executives, why we set those up. It's actually creating time where I facilitate space for them to have a conversation because they just don't have time to do it.
Everybody gets busy.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what my biggest pet peeve is? It's that word, busy.
yeah,
Because everybody's busy. It's not about whether you're busy or not busy. It's about the priorities that we choose to make. That ability, David, for you to facilitate the meeting between two executives so that they are fully aligned allows them to go back into their organization with the alignment, remembering the vision, and they can act on that. And the gloriousness that comes from those two executives being fully in sync is amazing.
yeah,
You need that.
yeah. Yeah, and then, as we talked about that noise in the system, they can filter through and start to adapt according to what's coming at them effectively, appropriately, prioritizing. It's can be magical. And the interesting thing is that I have yet to find a client who's not capable of doing that. They don't need me there to do that. It's just that they can't make the time without it.
Somebody once said to me, "Are you doing busyness or business?" Whenever I look at my day and I find that when my clients get very busy, I do the same thing with them. I want you to open up your to do list today and I want you to take a good look. So, listeners, this is a good thing for you to do. Open up your day and say, out of everything I need to do, what are the three things that are actually going to move the needle? Because then you can actually focus on doing business. Then you can be present for everybody else because although they're important, there's a lot of stuff that we do in the day that it's nice to do, but it's not mission critical. We make it mission critical. but it's not often as mission critical as we make it out to be.
Yeah, so true. So true.
Which
Gosh.
goes to delegation, if I can say.
Let's introduce another concept because we've only talked about three or four already. And that's what I was just about to say. In a short time, we've touched on a number of things that, contribute to this busyness that you spoke about. And I'm sure we could go on with our experiences and the challenges that the leaders that we work with face. So if a leader is caught in this cycle of busyness, all this noise, all this communication, having trouble filtering out that noise to understand where to focus, how to adapt as all these changes keep coming at them. Where do they start? Where should they start?
I like to get them to start at an Eisenhower matrix. It's really simple. They're looking at what you need to keep, what you need to delegate, and what you need to not touch, because it really doesn't move the needle. And if you can start to put your tasks in those three buckets, then you start to understand where you need to spend your time focused and where you need to help your team. Because you're never a success alone. You always have those people who are around you. And it is critical that you empower them to be amazing individuals. You've got them. They want to be amazing individuals. So help them do that. So that's one of the things I do like to do. And then out of the things that you keep, I always like to do, is it important or urgent? And there's a nice matrix around that one too, right? And so there's things that you just need to move the needle a little bit every single day. There's, yes, these urgent things that come up and you need to absolutely deal with them, right? Otherwise, the sky is going to actually fall. It's not Chicken Little. And the rest of it, you can try to delegate as much as possible.
Okay, Eisenhower Matrix. Well, we'll definitely put a link for our listeners to some resources on the Eisenhower Matrix, just so they have a bit more detail about what you've been speaking of. Susan, thank you so much for creating a bit of space for this conversation. I know we talked about a lot of things. I suspect we likely will have some good conversations in the future as well. And I look forward to chatting with you again.
David, it was amazing. I'm so glad you're going to put some links into the descriptions. That's awesome. Please, if you are experiencing that busyness and that chaos, take a moment to go to the Eisenhower Matrix and just try to clear the decks a little bit and give yourself the space and the grace. David, thank you for the invite.
My pleasure. Thank you. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the impact of instant communication on leadership to the importance of setting boundaries, creating space for strategic thinking, and empowering your team. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation with Susan, and be sure to check out the show notes for links to resources mentioned in the episode, including the Eisenhower Matrix, a tool Susan recommends for prioritizing tasks. Thanks for listening, and please join us on our next episode.